Rain fell hard over Paris the day Emmanuel Macron made the call. He sat in his gilded office in the Élysée Palace, looking out at the grey sky as if it belonged to him. His aides stood nearby, silent, watching as he dialed the secure line to Ouagadougou. The tone was courteous, even warm, but the message behind it carried a very old tone. Ibrahim, Macron said with a casual smile, France has invested in Burkina Faso for decades. Our advisors, our security forces, our aid programs. We've helped build what you are today. I hope you remember that. There was a slight pause on the line. Then Traoré's voice came back, calm and steady. I do remember, he said. And I also remember the price our people paid for that help. Macron chuckled, soft, rehearsed. You're young. You speak with passion. But passion must respect the weight of history. France made you. Don't forget that. Across the world, in a modest, unadorned office inside the presidential compound in Ouagadougou, Traoré stood up from his chair. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. Then watch us unmake you, he replied. The line went silent. No pleasantries, no goodbye. The call simply ended. Traoré turned to his security chief. They're not warning us, he said quietly. They're reminding us of the chains they still think we carry. That night, the Élysée issued an official statement proposing a renewed partnership framework with Burkina Faso, a diplomatic phrase for continued control. At the same time, unidentified trainers were seen arriving at a French base in Côte d'Ivoire, just across the border. In Ouagadougou, Traoré gathered his generals and community leaders under one roof. He didn't speak of threats or fear. He spoke of memory. Tomorrow they will call it cooperation, he said. But our grandparents called it something else. And they did not die so we could forget. No one asked what to do. They already knew. Word of Traoré's response spread through West Africa faster than any official communiqué. It wasn't televised. It wasn't published in a newspaper. Someone in the room had recorded the call, and by dawn, it was everywhere, on Telegram, Twitter, WhatsApp, repeated like a prayer. Then watch us unmake you. In Paris, the reaction was swift. French news outlets called it an insult to historical friendship. Talk show hosts framed Traoré as an ungrateful soldier, and pundits warned of destabilization in Francophone Africa. At the same time, French military activity increased along the Burkina border. Recon teams were redeployed from Niger. Drone flights became more frequent. On one leaked radio transmission, a French officer could be heard saying, "We just have to remind him who built that country." Back in Ouagadougou, Traoré stood on a dusty parade ground in front of a line of young recruits. No cameras. No podium. Just his voice carrying in the open air. You weren't born under occupation, he said. You were born under its shadow. Our task is not to negotiate the size of that shadow. It's to erase it. The recruits didn't cheer. They simply nodded, and tightened their grips on their rifles. Later that day, local miners arrived outside the presidential palace carrying an old colonial-era flag they had dug up from an abandoned French outpost. They laid it gently on the steps and set it on fire. They didn't chant. They didn't need to. The flames spoke loud enough. A few hours later, Macron held a press conference and stated, with a cool smile, France has always had a civilizing mission in Africa. We intend to continue it. The room applauded. In Ouagadougou, Traoré watched the clip on a cracked tablet. He didn't say a word, but the look in his eyes said everything. He turned to his advisor and spoke only one sentence. Then let the world see what being civilized truly means. The following morning, French media doubled down. Headlines spoke of Burkina Faso turning its back on French values, while analysts on television warned of radical nationalism spreading through the region. A commentary on state radio went further, calling Traoré's government a threat to civilized order. But in West Africa, the exact opposite effect took hold. In Bamako, a mural appeared overnight, Traoré breaking a colonial chain with the words, "Unmake the Empire," painted underneath. In Dakar, students organized a public reading of anti-colonial speeches from Thomas Sankara to Frantz Fanon. Every quote ended the same way: "This struggle continues." Meanwhile, French surveillance drones began flying deeper into Burkinabe territory. At 3:14, an armored patrol crossed 400 meters into the northwestern border. They withdrew after 3 minutes, but the message was clear: we can come whenever we want. Traoré gathered his generals and village leaders in the war room. The map on the wall showed multiple locations of renewed French activity. He didn't flare his voice. He simply pointed at the border and said, "From this moment, any unauthorized movement becomes a violation, and will be treated as one." A village elder stepped forward and placed his walking stick on the table. "It's time," he said, "to remind them that we did not survive centuries just to obey the same flag again." That evening, Traoré addressed the nation, not with a speech, but with a promise. "They say they made us. They say they will civilize us again. But we were nations long before their maps ever existed. And we will still be nations when their influence is nothing more than dust." Across the country, lights flickered in windows as families listened. No one clapped. No one shouted. They simply stood and absorbed the truth of what was coming. And then a new phrase began to appear on walls, on shirts, and in whispered conversations. "Unmake the empire." France responded the only way empires know how. 2 days after Traoré's address, a convoy of armored vehicles crossed the border near the town of Pama, by accident, according to Paris. The convoy remained on Burkinabe soil for 19 minutes before turning back. No shots were fired. No orders were given. It was a message, not an invasion. That evening, Macron appeared on national television. Sitting beneath a giant French flag, he delivered a polished statement filled with diplomatic language, shared history, mutual responsibility, civilizational partnership, but the final line came with unmistakable emphasis. "If necessary, France will take appropriate measures to protect stability in its former territories." In Ouagadougou, Traoré watched the broadcast surrounded by officers and village chiefs. When it ended, no one spoke. The silence felt heavier than any bomb. Finally, Traoré stood, walked slowly to the center of the room and said, "They still believe we are their territory." He turned to the map of Burkina Faso and drew a thick red line along every border. "From this moment," he said, "any foreign soldier who crosses this line does not enter a former colony. He enters a sovereign nation. And the response will match that truth." Word spread quickly. In villages, elders hammered wooden stakes into the ground at entry points, symbolic border markers once used before colonial administration ever existed. In cities, young people began painting murals with a new phrase. "If you cross, you break." As the sun set, Traoré walked out onto the balcony of the palace and looked across the darkening city, the rooftops, the small fires, the quiet streets filled with people who were not afraid. He whispered to himself the words that now echoed across the region. "Unmake the empire, step by step." The next morning, the response came from the people, not the government. In dozens of villages along the border, residents formed human chains near the old colonial roads. No weapons. No flags. Just men, women, and children standing shoulder to shoulder. Some held placards that read, "We are not your territory." French surveillance drones recorded the lines from the air. Analysts in Paris dismissed it as symbolic resistance. But the footage leaked, and within hours, it spread across the continent like fire. In Accra, people gathered outside the French embassy and held up the same message in bold red paint. In Abidjan, students walked out of their classes in silence, their shirts marked with the words, "Unmake the empire." Meanwhile, in Ouagadougou, Traoré chaired a meeting of his National Defense Council. New satellite data showed French special forces regrouping closer to the Burkinabe border. Intelligence reports spoke of pre-positioned assets and pressure maneuvers. The meaning was clear: they were preparing for an intervention if Burkina refused to bend. Traoré listened carefully and then stated plainly, "Their power depends on the belief that we will eventually submit. So let us remove that belief." He issued a nationwide directive: every foreign military presence, base, or training program on Burkinabe soil would be reviewed. Any that did not serve national interests would be dismantled. That afternoon, Burkinabe soldiers entered a French training facility near Kaya and calmly removed the French flag from the pole. They folded it carefully and handed it back to the departing officers. No hostility. No humiliation. Only certainty. Someone recorded the moment and posted it online with a caption: "We are not erasing history, we're ending it." By nightfall, that sentence had become an anthem. Not shouted, but repeated, softly, deliberately, like a promise made from one generation to the next. Events moved quickly after the flag was returned. France issued a sharply worded statement condemning the unilateral dismantling of cooperative defense structures. In private, French intelligence began contacting local opposition figures, promising support in exchange for a more cooperative administration. Burkinabe intelligence intercepted the communications. Within hours, the details were leaked to the public. Traoré didn't deny it, he confirmed it on national television. "They are no longer trying to negotiate with us," he said calmly. "They are trying to replace us." Instead of shock, the country answered with preparation. Villagers built makeshift checkpoints at key roads. University students volunteered to keep hospitals running in case outside funds were cut. Farmers moved surplus grain to communal storage sites. Across the border, French armored units shifted positions. Drone flights expanded. One general in Paris commented off record, "If they want to act like an independent country, we'll treat them like one." Traoré gathered his ministers one more time. He pointed at the map where French movement pressed against their borders like a tightening fist. "From this moment, we no longer prepare for resistance," he said. "We are the resistance." He signed a presidential decree expelling all remaining French military personnel from Burkinabe soil. It became effective immediately. As French trucks rolled toward the border under escort, crowds silently lined the roads, not to threaten, but to witness. Some carried signs. One of them simply read, "You said you made us. Now watch us stand without you." The trucks disappeared over the horizon. And for the first time in decades, the soil they left behind felt completely and entirely Burkinabe. The day after the French forces crossed the border, the clouds over Ouagadougou lifted as if the land itself could finally breathe. There were no parades, no official celebrations, just an unusual stillness, a quiet recognition of something real and irreversible. But Paris was not quiet. French media declared the withdrawal a strategic pullback. Politicians spoke of temporary adjustments. Macron, in a televised interview, insisted, "France remains the stabilizing force of Africa. Without us, chaos will return." Hours later, a convoy of Burkinabe engineers and village elders arrived at an abandoned French base. They removed the remaining fences, dismantled the antennas, and began converting the main building into a public school. No speeches, no banners. Just tools, blueprints, and fresh paint. Somewhere in Paris, Macron watched the footage. Smirking, he turned to his advisors and said, "They may think they've won. But they won't last a year without us." In Ouagadougou, Traoré received a copy of that recording. He didn't react with anger. He simply walked outside and addressed a small group of journalists waiting near the courtyard. "France believes it made us," he said. "Now it will watch as we remake ourselves." He paused, glanced at the sky, and added, "And when this work is done, they will realize that the only thing they ever built here was resistance. The rebuilding began faster than anyone expected. In the north, villagers repurposed an abandoned airstrip into a regional agriculture hub. In the east, former French barracks were transformed into local clinics and training centers. In the capital itself, retired teachers volunteered to reopen rural schools left unfunded by foreign aid programs. The work was hard and slow. Supplies were short, machinery was old, and the rain frequently washed away what had just been built. But the people refused to stop. Every structure rebuilt became a small refusal. Every wall raised became a sentence in a language France thought had disappeared. Soon, a new problem emerged in Paris. As images of Burkinabe reconstruction spread across Africa, other nations began asking questions. Why can't we do the same? A member of the French parliament warned, if we let this continue, the entire Francophone region will follow their example. Meanwhile, Macron tried a new tone, softer, more diplomatic. From the Élysée, he requested a dialogue with Traoré, offering renewed aid and development assistance. The message came with carefully chosen words. France wishes to help Burkina Faso return to a path of civilized progress. The offer reached Traoré's desk. He read it once, folded it back into the envelope, and handed it to an aide. File it under history, he said. That night, Traoré visited a construction site where volunteers were laying the foundation for a new school. A teenage boy mixing cement looked up and asked, "Monsieur President, when will they stop trying to control us?" Traoré laid a hand gently on his shoulder and answered, "When they finally understand that we have already stopped letting them." Weeks passed, and the rebuilding turned into a movement. Across the Sahel, other nations began sending volunteer teams to Burkina. A group of Malian engineers brought water purification systems. A Senegalese cooperative offered medical supplies. No contracts were signed. No repayment was requested. It was solidarity, the kind that empires could never understand. Seeing this, French media shifted once more. Now they spoke of African nationalism out of control, claiming that regional cooperation without France would lead to collapse. One commentator even asked on live television, "How long until they come begging for our support again?" In Ouagadougou, a farmer watched the broadcast on a dusty television in a rural coffee shop. He put down his cup, walked outside, and began writing 3 words on the side of his truck in black paint. "We beg no one." The phrase spread. It appeared on doors, market stalls, clinic walls. It was spoken in morning prayers and written in classroom chalk. Villagers carved it onto wooden signs and placed them at the old colonial border posts. Inside the presidential palace, Traoré received a final report. French intelligence operations had officially suspended active fieldwork in Burkina. They didn't give up, the security chief said. They finally understood there's nothing left to control. Traoré looked out the window toward a horizon filled with new construction, new partnerships, and new confidence. Empires fall in 2 stages, he said quietly. First, when they lose their power. Second, when they lose their relevance. He turned back to his staff with a calm certainty. And today, they've become irrelevant. The sun was setting over Ouagadougou when the last French military aircraft finally disappeared beyond the western horizon. It didn't leave to the sound of gunfire or protest, it left to the quiet rhythm of hammers striking wood and children laughing in school courtyards. That night, the people filled Independence Square. There were no speeches planned, yet everyone came. Some brought tools. Some brought flowers. Some brought nothing but their presence. Traoré stepped out onto the palace balcony. He didn't raise a fist. He didn't wave a flag. Instead, he stood silently for a long moment, looking at the thousands of faces in the square. Faces that belonged to miners, teachers, farmers, and children who had never known life outside the shadow of an empire, until now. And then he spoke, not loudly, but firmly. They said France made us. They claimed we were nothing without them. But look around you. We are still standing. We are still building. And we are more alive now than we have ever been. He paused as the crowd grew completely still. Let them watch us unmake their empire. Not with weapons or hatred. But with one simple truth. We don't belong to them. We never did. The crowd slowly raised their hands to their hearts, not in salute, but in recognition. The square was silent, and somehow louder than any applause could ever be. In Paris, Macron watched a short clip of the moment on a muted television. For one brief second the smirk faded, and the realization sank in. The empire hadn't been broken by war. It had been unmade by will. Empires aren't always defeated by bullets or armies. Sometimes they're defeated by a nation that finally refuses to kneel. France believed it made us. But it never understood that no empire can create the soul of a people. We didn't destroy their power. We simply stopped believing in it. And in that moment, we became something they could never control. Let them watch. Let them comment. Let them demand our return. Because we have already crossed a line they cannot follow. We have unmade their empire, by standing on our own.